tonight because I love the state of Israel and because I know, though we may come to it from different directions, that as both Americans and Christians, you share the love of Israel with me. Moses and the Exodus, so central to Judaism and the Jewish people, has also been central to the foundation of the United States and also the basic values that we hold true as Americans. As our good friend and your recent special guest, as Robbie mentioned, Ambassador Yoram Ettinger, pointed out, the founders of the Plymouth and Puritan colonies viewed their people as having been delivered from a modern-day Egypt and Pharaoh and as having crossed a modern Red Sea to a new Zion. And during the American Revolution against King George III, the rebels likened the 13 colonies to the 12 tribes of Israel. Founding fathers Ben Franklin, John Adams, and Thomas Jefferson even proposed a Passover theme for the official seal of these new United States. It was a pillar of fire leading Moses across the Red Sea with the Pharaoh and the chariots drowning behind them. Rebellion to tyrants is obedience to God, is what the inscription was to be. But the bonds between us go even further, even deeper than that to me as a Jew. Israel is God's promised land, and it's integral to the covenant that God has made with the Jewish people and intimately tied to our spiritual destiny and our redemption. Now, I realize that we may have differences in beliefs on many of the core tenets of our faiths, but I know that we both stand together when it comes to our belief that God has a plan for Israel, and it involves both Christians and Jews. So the establishment of the modern Israel, after almost 2,000 years of Jewish exile, can't help but be a sign that God has a plan for us, for all of us, and this plan is still in operation. So the establishment of modern Israel marks the beginning of its fulfillment, and I'm here today to tell you that we together can help fulfill this plan. So let me talk to you a little bit about how investment in Israel bonds can accomplish this. Christians have traditionally demonstrated their support for the state of Israel by traveling to the Holy Land, and I hope that many of you have had an opportunity to do this. If you've been to Israel in recent years, you've seen how remarkably well-developed and how modern everything is. When you first get off the plane, you see the beautifully renovated Ben Gurion Airport, and then you're on a highway system that can't help but remind you of Houston's. You'll pass green, well-irrigated fields, perhaps a visit to the port of Haifa. On the way, you'll pass the Hadera power plant and the Greenway-like business parks. They have signs all over the place from companies all over the world. And on your journey, you might see a new light rail system. You might go on to the Dead Sea and see the mineral extraction facilities. And at least 1 or 2 points on your trip, you'll have some water that came from a desalination plant in Israel. So what does all of this have to do with Israel bonds? All of these things which you would have experienced and seen and more are there directly and indirectly through the work and the investments made in Israel bonds. So Israel bonds were founded in 1951 by David Ben Gurion, Israel's first prime minister. In fact, my parents, my grandparents and my mother were at the very first Israel bonds rally in Madison Square Garden in New York City. So that was a really momentous moment in the United States. So, just a moment. Sorry about that. The bonds were issued to provide desperately needed capital to a new nation with no real industrial or agricultural base. So remember that this was a nation that was comprised of refugees from a very battered Europe from World War II and after the Holocaust, and other Jews that came from Arab North Africa and the Middle East, many having been driven from their homes. So in that very first year, just the first year after these bonds were introduced, $50 million in Israel bonds were sold, which was really a huge amount. And what's really remarkable is that the people that invested in these bonds, many of them actually thought that they were making a donation to the new state of Israel, not even realizing that they would end up getting their money back. So since that time, since 1951, over $35 billion with a B, has been invested worldwide in Israel bonds to build Israel's roads, ports, utilities, agriculture, and other aspects of Israel's economic infrastructure. And it changed Israel from a third world to a first world country. It turned it into the Silicon Valley of the Middle East. I'm sure you all have heard that, but it is true, and it remains one of the great high-tech centers of the world. And Israel bonds have been an important factor in facilitating the ingathering of the exiles, having been used to help provide jobs to plenty of immigrants that have come to Israel. Israel has absorbed over 1 million immigrants from the former Soviet Union that arrived in the early 1990s, and then also Jews from Ethiopia that were airlifted during Operation Moses in the mid-1980s. And what's important is that through all of the wars, all of the terror attacks and the crises that Israel has withstood, Israel has maintained an absolute perfect record on payment of interest and principal. So institutions, including banks, own millions of dollars in Israel bonds, including our very own state of Texas, which owns about $35 million in Israel bonds. And I'm very happy to say that just recently, the city of Houston has also made its first investment in Israel bonds. Under the leadership of City Controller Ron Green, they've made a $5 million investment, which is really wonderful. So thank you, Houston. And also, so through the years, Israel's Moody's and Standard & Poor's ratings, these bonds have remained investment grade from the very beginning, and the grade has actually increased to AA1, which is really wonderful news. And in fact, in September 2001, in the middle of this economic crisis that still is continuing, as the ratings for the United States and other countries was dropping, Moody's actually increased Israel's rating, which is really remarkable, and it has maintained that high rating ever since. So that's definitely can give you some confidence in investing in Israel bonds. And importantly, Israel bonds are affordable to just about everybody. One can go online to www.israelbonds.com and invest in Israel bonds for as little as $36. If you would like to pay by check and don't want to do it online, the minimum amount is $100. But these are accessible for all. At higher investment levels, like at $1,000, $5,000, or even higher, $25,000, there are a bunch of different options that are available. And Eric Lippman is here. Wave to everyone here. From Israel Bonds, and he can help you go over those different options after this program is over. So let me tell you a little bit about the state that Israel is in right now and why Israel needs our help and needs our investment. So there's no escaping that there's a particular urgency right now that Israel finds itself in. And you'd probably have to go back 40 years to perhaps the Yom Kippur War to find a time when things have been as precarious as they are for Israel. So in any direction that one looks from Israel, there's only chaos and uncertainty. Across Israel's northeastern border, we have Assad and the Syrian government where they're using chemical weapons against their own people during a civil war that's been taking place, and a conservative estimate of 110,000 lives which have already been lost. Assad's government is being actively aided in this war by Hezbollah, which is a Shiite terrorist organization that has a stranglehold over Lebanon and direct ties to Iran. Then there's Egypt, where the overthrow of Mubarak ended over 30 years of a peace. Albeit it was a cold peace, but it was still a peace. But now there's just an enormous question mark that seems to be the situation's just changing on a daily basis. So that uncertainty makes it really difficult for Israel. Then you have Jordan, which is absolutely flooded by refugees coming both from Iraq and then also from the Syrian civil war. And the status of King Abdullah is also in a precarious situation. So the pressure on Israel is just increasing every single day. Recently initiated negotiations with the Palestinian Authority are very intense. Hamas and its affiliates also remain a constant threat. There's also the movement to stop the worldwide investment in Israel, the Boycott, Divestment, Sanctions, or BDS movement. This is a continual movement that's been going on over the past few years, and it is attempting to delegitimize the state of Israel. So, of course, the largest threat of all, which is the threat of Iran, that one is just a dark cloud over Israel. It's really the worst and the biggest threat that Israel faces. So right now there is a new frontman in Iran, Rouhani, President Rouhani, and he's been launching a charm offensive, as you all might see in the news. But make no mistake whatsoever that just because there has been a change in leadership, there has not been any change whatsoever in the goals and the movements ahead in trying to fulfill their goal of having a nuclear weapon. Rouhani is trying to lull the world into a false complacency, and the threat of a nuclear Iran that is still pledged to Israel's destruction hangs over Israel and remains the largest threat. So let there be no illusions that this is just business as usual for Israel, because it's really a tough time. In fact, Israel's finance ministry has set an unprecedented goal of $950 million invested in Israel bonds this year, and that's just the United States goal. So it's a very huge goal. That amount of $950 million, just a couple of years ago, that would have been the worldwide goal, but this is the goal for just now in the United States. So these are awfully large numbers, and you might think that with numbers like this, a $36 bond or a $100 bond might not mean much, but it really does. It means a lot. Nothing could be further from the truth. Any investment in an Israel bond is valued very highly, and it's very important. And I'll tell you, for one thing, what it does is it establishes a bond between you and the state of Israel, a financial bond. Second, and this is a very important thing, as a very active member of AIPAC, I can tell you that the members of Congress and the United States government as a whole, they look to see what the bond sales are from Americans, and they use that as a barometer to see what the support is that Americans have for Israel. So not only is the state looking at a dollar figure for what they want sold, but they're also just looking for the participation. So $36, it's a very small way to participate in this, and it, even just for gifts, it's really a wonderful way to do it. So the bottom line is simply that Israel must remain strong, and our investment in Israel bonds by both members of the Jewish and Christian communities will help strengthen Israel so that it can successfully meet the dire challenges that it's facing. And so I ask you today, Christian friends of Israel, some Jewish friends in here as well, to stand with Israel in solidarity. It is very important to the morale of the people of Israel to know that we as Americans are here supporting Israel in every way possible. So I would encourage all of you to make an investment in Israel bonds. And again, Eric can help you with any questions you have. Thank you.
Thank you, Elise. Great job. Eric, would you stand up a minute so people can see you? Eric is a representative with Israel Bonds. He has a table with a lot of information back on the back that you can check into later on. Elise is an active member of AIPAC along with her husband, Mark, and they've become close friends of Pam and mine over the last 3 or 4 years as we've been involved together in AIPAC, and so it's great to have her come and give a presentation for Israel Bonds, and it's that involvement with AIPAC that has been really significant, as you all know, those of you who are members of my congregation, in many of the ways in which we have, as a congregation, learned more about Israel and been involved more actively in understanding things related to Israel. And it was due to the leadership of AIPAC about 6 or 7 years ago, recognizing the significance of evangelical Christian support in the United States for Israel, that they began to actively reach out to the evangelical community to recruit members for AIPAC, because it's expected, as it were, from our politicians and legislatures that if you're Jewish, you're going to support Israel. They just sort of assume that. But if you come and you're not Jewish, and you come and you talk to your legislature, your congressman, senator, in favor of the U.S.-Israel relationship, then that really carries a tremendous amount of weight. Pam and I, just completely apart from AIPAC's outreach effort, had actually it was Pam's initiative. She's the one who first found out about AIPAC, and we joined AIPAC mostly just to find out more about Israel, and one thing has led to another. As a result of that outreach effort on AIPAC's part, they have been taking groups of Christian leaders to Israel through their AIEF, that's the American Israel Education Foundation, which also takes many different legislators, politicians from many different levels of government, leaders from different areas in the United States over to Israel in order to give them a basic orientation to Israel and to what is going on in the Middle East. It's not just sort of a one-sided propaganda tour. We do get, there was a lot of exposure to different positions, different viewpoints, and this is how I met our speaker this evening, Vida Velasco, was that we were both on this trip that I took back in May of this year when we went over on about a 6 or 7 day tour of Israel. Vida and I and 2 or 3 others also stayed some extra time. Vida traveled with Becky Keenan from Gulf Meadows Church and spent an extra day going through Shomron, which is the Hebrew for Samaria, and we went to Shechem and Mount Gerizim and to Jericho and to a number of other sites in what is called Area A, which is a Palestinian-controlled area, which was just phenomenal to go to those ancient sites and to see so much. But I became quite impressed with Vida, her passion for Israel. She works for an organization that Stand With Us, and she's the only Gentile, the only Christian on staff with Stand With Us. And part of her responsibility is to challenge and to mentor teenage Jewish girls to be better advocates for Israel. And so she has a unique story, unique background, and so now I'm going to turn it over to Vida. And what's also interesting is when I first met her and really got to know her, we were sitting next to each other at dinner the first night we were in Jerusalem, and I found out that she was also taking classes at Moody Bible Institute. And I said, oh, I know the head of the Jewish Studies department there, Michael Rydelnik. Do you know him? She said, oh, yeah, he's a close family friend. He's my mentor and everything of that nature. So we had suddenly discovered lots of commonality. And so it's just great to be able to bring her here and to have her speak to you.
Well, there's nothing to hook that on, so I can't write. Good evening, everyone. Oh, we're awake, yes. I'm barely awake. I am still kind of in a food coma because we went to Kenny and Ziggy's earlier, and I took down one of the Reubens, and then it took me down. I had to take a nap after. But I have just been so overwhelmed with the hospitality of Houston. It really feels like Israel here because people in Israel are just so hospitable, and that's just how they do it in Texas, too, so I can see why you guys get along. My name is Vida Velasco. I am the Central Region High School Coordinator for Stand With Us. And what my organization is dedicated to is to making sure that people have a resource for the facts that are on the ground that are happening in Israel. And the reason why I say on the ground is because, as we know, when you look at the news and you see what's reported, even if it's about any topic, things that are happening up here, like in the upper echelons of the government, aren't necessarily representative of how we all feel. And I mean, we just look at the last crisis, the shutdown, the government shutdown, and it was kind of funny because even though the government was shut down, my lights still turned on, and things were okay. It was kind of shameful that it happened, but things were really different. Like the day-to-day stuff of everyday people many times is different from what's reported and what's talked about in the media. And this was especially illustrated during the Second Intifada. So between 2000 and 2005, Israel faced some of the worst terror that any country has ever faced, where terrorists were coming over from the West Bank every single day, and you couldn't get on a bus. And I know here in Houston, buses are non-existent because everyone drives their own car, but I'm from New York, and I live in Chicago now. And I remember when people would come to visit me in New York. I lived on the Upper East Side, and I'm like, okay, we're gonna get on the bus and we're gonna go to Midtown, and because I'm really short and I don't like getting on the subway because I'm like armpit level with people. It's not so great. So I like getting on the bus, and they're like, that's kind of weird. We don't ride buses. Only weird people ride buses. I'm like, just wait and see. So they would see, like, ladies in furs and diamonds getting on the bus. I'm like, see, everybody takes the bus in New York. And so that's how it is in Israel. A lot of people take buses, and it's just a normal way of transportation there. And because of this terrorism and people blowing themselves up, everyday life was disrupted. And so that was what was happening on the ground in Israel, but nobody was reporting it properly here. And so the founders of my organization, who are from Los Angeles, they're Roz and Jerry Rothstein, they gathered all of the leadership in LA and said, you guys, why isn't anybody holding the media accountable? And why isn't anyone speaking up against nobody saying anything or blaming or saying that Israel brought it upon themselves, that they're having all of this terror? It's horrible. And they realized that nobody had education as their mission statement, because as we know, for any good organization to function, you have to have a mission statement and to stick to one thing, which is why I esteem AIPAC so much. I mean, they've been around for over 50 years. I've been a member for over 6 years. And they stick to one thing, keeping Congress having a strong relationship with Israel. That's what they do. And every other organization had different things that they wanted to do, so Stand With Us was born. And we found that there was a huge need for this, especially on college campuses. So I'm going to tell you tonight why someone like me, I'm Filipino. I was born and raised in a Christian home. Why someone like me has decided to dedicate the rest of her life to speaking up for Israel. So I had no idea that I had because most people look at me and they're like, okay, I'm trying to figure you out. Vida, you're, tiny Asian lady. You wear really tall heels, but you're still small. I have to stand on a platform right now to be able to see all of you. You used to be a broker in Manhattan. You were really successful. Why did you walk away from all of that? And so for a lot of people, to the untrained eye, speaking up for Israel, for me, doesn't really make much sense. But when I look at my life and I see just how the Lord has led me through, and I look at the heritage of my family and my culture, like the Philippines was the only Asian country who voted yes on the UN partition plan in 1947, and my great-uncle was on that delegation. And he was also the ambassador to the UN from the Philippines for about 6 years and was always very supportive of the Jewish state. And then our president in 1937 issued about 10,000 visas to German Jews because he saw what was happening and he was really concerned. And from Berlin to Manila, even now, is kind of a far way, but in the 30s, that was a huge journey. But 1,300 Jews made it to the Philippines. And the Philippines was the only country in Asia that did not, actually anywhere, that did not have a ghetto set aside for their Jews. They could live anywhere that they wanted to, even though the government had set aside land. They said you can live anywhere you want to. And they even built a synagogue in Manila that still is open and functioning and beautiful, and they still have services for anyone who wants to come. So my country just has been very supportive and loving of the Jewish people and remains so today. But what really did it was because of my parents, especially my mother. So my mother was born in Flushing and raised on Long Island. And I always knew when she was angry was because her Long Island accent would start coming out. And, so we always paid attention to that. And when she was 14 years old, two very major things in U.S. history happened. Martin Luther King was assassinated, And then several months later, because we're New Yorkers, Robert Kennedy was assassinated. And for the first time, my mother experienced racial tension. And it got so bad at her school that their principal called an all-school assembly. And she remembers walking down the middle aisle of their auditorium. My mother's from Uniondale. And on this side, there were all the white kids. On this side, there were all the black kids. She was the only neither one of those things. So she had no idea where to sit. So she turned around, went home, spoke to my grandmother, and she said, "I need to go home." My grandmother's like, "What are you talking about? You are home." She's like, "No, I need to go home to the Philippines. I need to find out who I am." So at 14 years old, my mother flew halfway across the world to live with my great-grandparents. And my great-grandfather was a Supreme Court judge, and he was also a deep lover of the Scriptures. He had the Hebrew Bible memorized. And he loved the Scriptures so much that he would weep when he would recite the Psalms with my mother. And he and my great-grandmother were so excited when the state of Israel was reborn, and they felt that it was prophecy being fulfilled before our very eyes. And they actually went to Israel at the end of late 50s, early 60s. They went a couple of times before there was any. I went this last summer, and it's beautiful, and there's a lot of tourism. There was no infrastructure, in the late 50s. But they just wanted to see it with their own eyes, all of, God's people coming home and being gathered from the far corners of the earth to come home. And so this love that was instilled in my mother was in turn instilled in us. I have 3 siblings, and I remember just the very first book I read was the Bible. And all over the Scriptures you see Israel and the Jewish people, and that Israel was just such an important part of God's promise to his people. So for me, ever since I was really little, I just knew that Israel and the Jewish people went together, kind of like when you drop something, gravity takes it and hits the floor, peanut butter and jelly go together, those kinds of things, things that are laws of nature. And so when I was in 2nd grade, I had a Sunday school teacher who was really excited about the Jewish roots of Christianity. And so he taught us about Pesach, about Passover. And I remember making little unleavened bread cakes, and we'd put them in the oven. And he was like, "Yeah, this is probably how the Israelites did it." And I'm like, "They didn't have gasoline and electricity." I was very literal. But he was really excited about it. And those were seeds that were planted in my heart about Israel. And then when I was in 3rd grade, I don't know if any of you remember 3rd grade, but when I was in 3rd grade, we went through just kind of the broad strokes of geography. So here's where stuff is. Here are all your continents. Here are all your major countries. And we get to the Middle East. And our teacher shows us Israel. And it's like this big. And I got so upset. I raised my hand and I said, "That is a lie. Israel is no way that small. Israel goes down past the Sinai, across the Jordan River, all the way to the Euphrates." And I said, "You are a great teacher, but if you're lying about Israel, you're probably lying about other stuff, and I don't know if you should be our teacher anymore." And my class was crying, all the little girls were crying, and everyone was riled up. That was the only time I was taken to the principal's office was for Israel. And they sit me down, and I'm so upset. And they're like, "Vida, why are you so mad?" I'm like, "Well, because that's a lie. Israel is not that small." And then they understood. I'm like, "Okay. Is the Israel that you're thinking of the Israel that's on the map in the back of your Bible?" I'm like, "Of course, and everything that's in my Bible is true." They're like, "Okay." I know they were trying not to laugh because I laugh about it when I think about it now. They're like, "Okay, so the Jewish people were gone for a little while from home, like 2,000 years. But now they're back. But this is how it looks like now. It's this small. And that's modern Israel. You're thinking about ancient Israel. Like, okay, so I apologized to my whole class, exonerated my teacher, said that she was not a liar, and we were able to go on with our lives. So those were the things that I always had just such warm, loving feelings for Israel, was defending it at a young age, even unknowingly. And, living in New York, and I used to be a broker with Halstead Property, which is one of the top real estate brokerage firms. It became kind of a joke because I used to live my life in 15-minute increments. So I was always really, really, really busy. But there was a time during the week that was very sacred. So at 2 o'clock on Friday and all of Saturday, you could not reach me or my boss. We were totally offline. And so our clients assumed that we were Shomer Shabbat, that we observed Shabbat. And we were some of the only Gentiles in our firm. And so it became a huge joke in our firm that my boss was the Shomer Catholic lady and I was the Shomer Asian kid. And, so these associations, just with Jewish life, and, we're always positive. I had friends who were making Aliyah. I knew what Aliyah meant, to leave and go to Israel and to immigrate to Israel, become a citizen. I don't know if you guys remember, but at the end of 2010, there was a huge wildfire in Carmel in northern Israel. I was devastated because I had planted 20,000 trees, not knowing that they were an invasive species. So it was probably good that they burned down. But I was really devastated. I'm like, my forest is gone. So these were, when I thought about Israel, these were the things that I thought about. So it wasn't until my sister, who's one of my best friends, she took a Holocaust class. And because we talk about everything, she was talking about the things that she was learning. And her professor was Dr. Idelnik, and he was really good at teaching that it wasn't the Holocaust that made the rebirth of Israel happen. Because as we know, with modern Zionism, it was already going to happen. The infrastructure and the everything, the foundation of a state was already there. They just had to declare independence. But what the Holocaust did was show that there needs to be an Israel, and that the Jewish people needed to have the ability to self-determine so that something like the Holocaust would never happen again. So it accelerated the process of the establishment of the state. And so because she had no idea about this, and then she was in turn teaching it to me, she took another class on the history and thought of modern Israel and learned the incredible miracle of just the regathering and the reestablishment of the state. And then at the very end of her course, they did a series on, threats that are facing Israel today. And one of them is something that we all have a responsibility to speak up against. And that is the delegitimization movement. And she learned that there are people who wake up every morning and say, okay, what can I do today to delegitimize Israel and harm the Jewish people so that, because before the entire world was behind the idea of there being a Jewish homeland. And that there are people out there who want to dehumanize the Israelis so that they are no longer supported by the world. And we're already seeing that. And we're seeing Israel getting more and more isolated, in the international community. And so I didn't believe it because, as you heard all throughout my life, up until that point, Israel and the Jewish people went together. I still liked peanut butter and jelly. Those things were, again, still laws of nature for me. So I didn't believe her. So I started studying it on my own. And I'm one of those weird people who still reads real books. And I read everything that I could put my hands on. And the only conclusion that you can come to when you examine the facts is that Israel not only has the right to exist, but that the world is better with Israel in it, and also that the other unfortunate reality is that people are out there looking to destroy Israel. And I was also at a very pivotal point in my life where I became very dissatisfied with success. God had been stirring in my heart this, making money was really cool. And, I had already made, I had done really well already, and I was, I had a flat of my own on the Upper East Side, I was doing really well. And he showed me, and I wasn't even walking with him then. He showed me that there was more. And I knew that I wanted to give back something to the world, something that was going to mean more than just money. And so I thought to myself, I'm like, I've always cared about Israel, so why don't I do something for Israel? So I quit my job, closed off, all the rest of my deals, got rid of my flat, and I went to Chicago. And I've always thought it wise to, if you're going to make any big moves, to go somewhere where you have a support system. And I had a big support system in Chicago because my parents had moved there, and then most of my siblings lived there. And I started going to DePaul University. I made it through 3 quarters of their Middle Eastern Studies program. And the reason why I had to leave there was because of an incident that happened. April, so it was spring quarter. And I remember walking up, because I was just going to sit in the student center and do some reading. And before you get to the student center, there's a really big fountain and then a wide space before you get in the door. And I saw these 4 guys. They were just 4 normal white dudes. I'd seen them in my classes. They were all sophomores. And they were laying on the ground, and they were draped in keffiyeh and lying in really grotesque positions. I don't even know. They must have been doing yoga before because it was just really gross. And they were covered in fake blood. And they were screaming out things against Israel, saying that, Israeli soldiers kill Palestinian babies, that they're harvesting Palestinian organs. And one guy just over and over, he didn't even have any variety. He was just saying, kill all the Jews, kill all the Jews. The world is better off, kill all the Jews. And they had this huge flag of Israel. It was bigger than the length of this lectern here, and it was really big, covered in fake blood. And I am not a violent person, but I almost shed real blood that day because I was so upset. And I had that feeling in the pit of my stomach, and my blood boiled, and I yelled at all of them, and I said, how dare you? How dare you? How dare you say that against anyone? But I know that that's not true about Israel. And they all gathered up against me and started screaming at me, calling me a fascist. And, how dare you support, a genocidal state like Israel? And that's when I knew that A, I couldn't go to that school anymore, but B, that I also, because they were talking about the existence of a people, and these are people who were not affiliated with the conflict whatsoever. They were just kids from the suburbs. But they were being given these ideas about Israel that were not true. But because they're so emotional, and that I know that it goes against just how Jewish people are in general, they don't show the suffering of their people. That's why you don't see when bombings happen, you don't really hear about it. You don't hear about it from the Israeli side because it's always about, we can do better. We can heal from this and we can do better. And we're going to be fine. We're just going to move on. Whereas on the other hand, critics of Israel will show it. They call it the dead baby strategy. So the more dead babies they have, the better it is for them because it puts more and more PR pressure on Israel. Because they can say that's Israel's fault. It's Israel's fault. We need to blame Israel. We have to do something about this, this Zionist cancer. And so I didn't know then that, I was getting really, really close to the point where I was going to surrender my life to God finally for the rest of my life. So my sister started going to a church in October of 2009. And because one of our friends had become the associate pastor there. And I started going with her, and for most of my life I had hated Christians. I thought they were all hypocrites. And with the exception of a few people because I had read the Bible and it says that you're supposed to love each other, and I had never seen that before. And then I walked into this congregation and they really did. They really loved each other. And it scared me. I'm like, wow, there are actually people who can order their lives this way. And so I had gotten to the point where I'd been going with her for several months. And if this is any encouragement to any of you, to those very resistant friends of yours, God's doing a work in their heart, and just keep praying for them and keep bringing them to church, because if he can save me, he can save anybody. And the day that I had decided was going to be my last day going to church was May 14th, 2010, which was the week before my very first APAC policy conference. And I decided that was going to be my last day going to church. And I remember just as the sermon was starting, I checked out. I started, my mind started wandering, because I'm really good at looking interested and not listening at all. Something my generation's really good at. But the only thing that you can do to make me pay attention to you is start talking about Israel. And that's what our senior pastor did. His very first story, because he was preaching about the Exodus, but his very first story was about going to Israel, to Yad Vashem, which is the Holocaust museum in Jerusalem. And he talked about going there and the impact that it had on his life, and that, everyone leaves with a pin, which I have now too, that reminds us of never again. And so he was talking about the Exodus as a turning point in Israel's history, that it was the first time that, Israel was oppressed because Pharaoh recognized them as a nation, and he knew that at a certain point, a people that is a nation needs a land. And that they already had a land promised to them. And that the Exodus was the time when they became a nation going home. And he talked about how there are turning points in our own lives that we cannot ignore. And I knew at that point that, God spoke to me and he said, this is my time now. I gave you 10 years on your own, y'all messed it all up. So now it's mine. And then the very next week, went to my very first APAC policy conference. And this was the last year that they still did the gala dinners where everyone sits together and they have the roll call of all the important people, and we're sitting in the way back. And, and I got to sit with people from Chicago, which is where I live. And I met this girl named Lisa. And the week after that, Lisa introduced me to Brett Cohen, who is my organization's national campus director. And then the rest is history. I became their first non-Jewish Emerson Fellow. So our Emerson Fellowship is for college students who, are on university campuses nationwide. And we're in our 7th year of that program, and we teach students how to be good advocates for Israel and how to have the Israel conversation that takes the lens off of the conflict and talks about the real Israel beyond the conflict, everything that's happening there. But I wanted to show you today a video that was put together by different Emerson Fellows and our campus coordinators. And it's very sobering, and I know it's going to be a little shocking because I've seen this video like 200 times, and it still angers me. But this is the reality that your youth are facing, that our youth are facing. And now I work with high school students, and it really is an honor for me because I know that, I have been given the key to such a treasure, the future of, the Jewish future, and to have the ability to mentor and shape and, be, someone who is very, just in these kids' lives is really amazing. And I was able to speak at Bel Air High School. I guess Pastor Robbie graduated from there like 200 years ago. And so one of my interns is from there. And then I spoke at Emory Weiner, the Jewish, private Jewish school. And they need our help. They really do. And because the unfortunate thing is that people assume that our support of Israel is kind of a natural thing. But even for me, I didn't even know that I needed to support Israel. Even though I had such loving feelings towards Israel, I didn't know that I had to take action on it. But as we know, that faith without works is dead. If you love something, you have to demonstrate it. And if we love God and He loves His people, we have to love His people too. And that really, for me, is the bottom line. So I'm going to show you this video.
Anti-Zionism! Anti-Israel! Anti-hate! Anti-Israel! Anti-genocide! Anti-Israel! Anti-baby killing! Anti-baby killing!
A professor, he had pictures juxtapose Nazis and Jewish people in concentration camps and Jewish people being murdered to Israelis and Palestinian children in the West Bank.
From the river to the sea!
Palestine will be free!
But the Jews, I would say, see what could happen to you if the Muslims wake up. And I say to the Muslims, dear brothers and sisters, unite and rise up against this hydra-headed monster which calls itself Zionism.
It's Zionism. Zionism must be destroyed. It must be gotten rid of. Every aspect of it.
A racist, occupying, expansionist, aggressive, warlike state as exists in Tel Aviv.
Zionism is a mixture, a fusion of the concept of white supremacy and the chosen people. It is a fusion.
Right now, let's go. Anti-hate! Anti-Israel! Anti-Israel! Anti-hate! Anti-Israel! Anti-oppression! Anti-Israel! Anti-racism! Anti-Israel! Anti-racism! Anti-Israel! Anti-murder! Anti-Israel! Anti-hate! Anti-Israel!
If we condemn the Nazi Holocaust, we must also condemn what I have described as slow-motion Israeli genocide against the Palestinians.
Two-state solution is off the table. No. One state. And check this out. One state, majority rules. One state, majority rules. Us, the Muslims.
Israel is able to do these things, to dismantle and destroy the West Bank, to disintegrate the community, because the United States gives it massive aid.
This cancerous presence of the Israeli interest that has taken over the American body politic. Trying to point to the lethal presence of the Zionist interest within it and purge your religious or your political circle from any effects of Zionism, and the world will be a better place for all of us.
You know the kind of stuff that they're doing, the type of spy network that they have in this country. Stand up to them.
Just about every day they're invading Nablus, often Hebron, often Bethlehem. They're kidnapping people just about every day, and every week they are killing people.
If a Nazi came up to you and said, look, we're the Third Reich, you're Jews, let's sit down for tea and crumpets, you would say, get out of here, I'm a Jew,
I ain't sitting down no Nazi for tea and crumpets. Y'all the new Nazis. Y'all the new Nazis. Y'all the new Nazis.
All right, really fun stuff, huh? Like I said, I've seen this so many times, and it still kills me every time. So this is what we're facing out there, and our students really need your help. Oh, sorry, don't want to watch it again. But there is hope. I can tell you that there is hope. But we all have a responsibility, again, because it is the existence of a people. This transcends it being a Jewish issue. And I'm just going to close, if you guys want to ask me any questions, but every Shabbat, which is when Sabbath starts for Jewish people on Friday night, they read from Proverbs 31. And what do you guys think of when you hear Proverbs 31? Exactly, the valiant woman, right? But right before that passage, so verses 8 and 9, is this beautiful passage about what makes a good king. And for me, what really crystallizes why I speak up for Israel every day, and I talk to people about Israel every day. I bother people on airplanes, when I'm getting my nails done, when I'm in the line at the grocery store. I talk to people about Israel every day, and I am challenging my students to do the same thing. And if this gives you any hope, I had an intern in Detroit who was really, really shy. And he really blossomed he let me mentor him. And he took my challenge really seriously. So this past spring semester, he shared at our fall conference, or actually at our spring conference back, and this was right before I was going to Israel for the first time. So my heart was just full. And he said that he had spoken to over 250 people just in daily conversation about Israel. And these were the seeds that he was planting. And this is what the next generation is trying to do, but they need our help, they need our support, and they also need to be educated. But, so for me, that verse in Proverbs 31, I encourage all of you to look at it when you get home, is that each one of us has to speak up for those who have no voice. For those who are mute, we must open our mouths. And that, for me, is the reason why I speak up for Israel every day, because I'm a rarity where I usually speak to mostly Jewish audiences. Like when I ask anybody in the room who's not Jewish, I'm the only one raising my hand. And I have a specific role, too, because the unfortunate thing, too, is that many times when, like my Jewish friends and Jewish people who I know, I have to be the one to remind them that they shouldn't be ashamed of who they are, that no one should make you feel ashamed to be Jewish. But there are people out there who are making our Jewish friends ashamed to be Jewish on campuses, especially because they're being held accountable for what the Jewish state does because there's only one. And so when they're accused of oppressing innocent civilians and they don't know anything, of course they're going to feel ashamed. So, but in most states of the Union, there are far more non-Jewish people than there are Jewish people, and they have no voice in those states. So that's why I need to speak up for those who have no voice. And also, you can see that the story of Israel is being hijacked. It's being stolen by anti-Israel activists. And so the voice of Israel is being lost. And that's another reason why I speak up. So thanks for having me, guys.
Does anybody have any questions that they'd like to ask Vida? Okay, we'll start off with Elise here.
What's the best source for news on what's going on in Israel today?
What was that question again, Doug? I need to repeat it.
The best source.
Best source of news for what's going on in Israel today.
None of them. You don't have to be weird like me. I read about 12 news sources every day just to compare what people are saying. But what you can do, and this is what you have to do, Because here's the thing. Media operates on the same rules of capitalism like any other business. It's supply and demand. So they're going to supply whatever they think that their audience wants. And I'll give you an example of what we were able to do to help keep the media accountable. So during Operation Pillar of Defense, which just happened in this past November, was when Israel took out the head of Hamas's military. And then Hamas responded with rockets, and then Israel, responded, with defensive measures. And then the entire world was, Israel's attacking Gaza again. But because we had all of our students and everybody, all hands on deck, tweeting, being on Facebook, keeping these reporters and everybody accountable. I remember it was near the end of the second day of the operation. And I don't watch CNN because they're horrible. But Anderson Cooper, we're all familiar with him. I swear, I thought there was like a practical joke being played on me. Because I was watching the news, and it was his face, his voice, and he was standing in Jerusalem, but he was saying balanced things about Israel. And actually kind of nice things about Israel, and truthful things about Israel. And the reason for that is because there was so much pressure, not only through social media, but they were getting phone calls and letters like, hey, we know this isn't true, start reporting the facts. And we need to keep that pressure on, because if they hear from us, each one of us has a voice. But usually I read, AP and Reuters, they're both really bad. But what I do is I pick out just like kind of the commonalities between them. And then that's what actually happened. Like the things that, you can get rid of all of the other stuff. But if you pick out the things like, okay, all of this stuff happened in each one of these columns, that's what actually happened. And then also we also are, and Times of Israel is really good. It's a new blog that's fairly new. That one's really, really good. Jerusalem Post, actually, they report our news better than we do a lot of the time. But I do compare a lot. Washington Post is still okay. Don't read the New York Times. It's also really gross.
Times of Israel, say that.
I wrote Shiva, Devkafile, IDF.
Yeah, those are all good, Doug. And Times of Israel is good, too. Times of Israel just mentioned. You want to add anything, Lenny?
No, I think that you covered that. I think that's AIPAC has AIPAC is some of the Jewish organizations.
Right, AIPAC has some material on there, Terry?
JTA.org is...
JTA.org.
It used to be the Jewish Telegraphic Agency, but now it's just JTA.org. The Times of Israel, JTA, you can both get daily emails filled with all the news with links to more comprehensive and in-depth reporting. Those two get you started, and then from there they also give links to other articles which are in more depth, like in the Jerusalem Post or the English version of Haaretz. So there's a plethora of stuff on the internet where you can get straight news.
Right. Also, the Daily Alert, which is composed for the presidents of Jewish organizations. I get that every day in my email. Look at that. Okay, Elise.
Thank you, Vida. That was terrific. I appreciate it. My question is relates to a friend of mine's son who just started college at U of H. He was a Bel Air grad, and he emailed me, called me, and he's really concerned because there's a large group at U of H of the SJP, Students for Justice of Palestine, and he and his friends started an organization called Stand Up to try to counteract these folks. And I just felt so sad when he called. He's like, "What can I do? Where should I go? What can I do?" So, what advice do you think that I could give him on? I don't want him to have to recreate the wheel. If there's some resources that he could.
Who wants to get in touch with me? This is what I'm here for. We have an international network, actually, And that's the thing that's really wonderful about Stand With Us, because we're all about education, and this is something that all of us need to be aware of. I think and that's really great that he started that, because we know that U of H is a problem. We tried to get an Emerson Fellow there this year, but maybe he would be a really good candidate for that. But since he's a freshman this year, we wouldn't be able to take him until next year, because we want students to get acclimated to their environment first and not be totally branded as like the crazy Israel person yet. But yeah, I know, it's fine. I am too. But I would be more, because that's the other thing too, is that a lot of these students feel like they're alone, and they walk on campus. And that's why I work with high schoolers, so that they're ready. Like, I wish that, I had been there speaking at Bel Air, because I've gone there 2 years in a row now, and, just speaking to, the Jewish students there to help them understand that, you're not alone. But also, they don't know how to speak up if they're not comfortable with the facts. And it takes time. It takes time to be comfortable with the facts, and they need to be given the resources to be able to do that. And that's what my organization's all about. We are there to, we've made it kind of a science of, how to, because we're not interested in arguments. We're not interested in debates. We're interested in engagement. And we teach our students how to take any objection against Israel and to turn it around and make it something positive and leave your message on it. Really diffusing these hate bombs that are being thrown around. And I think this is really important, because now I know that, the students who are going into APAC in the future, they're educated and they know what's going on. And because so many of these students are like, okay, so then they're challenged on, how could you support Israel when they're committing genocide? And I'm like, oh, because I'm Jewish, and that's how I grew up, and it's really important to me. That unfortunately is not going to hold up against someone accusing you of killing babies. It just doesn't. But when you can say, like, hey, wait, hold on a second, I know the facts. Let's pull back here for a second, and I'm going to give you the context. We're going to talk about cause and effect, and that's what they were able to do after we trained them. Yeah.
What do you recommend for training people? Because a lot of times people are in a situation where they hear claims against Israel, and they know it's not right, and they need to learn the proper way to give an answer, to respond, to as you just said, turn the argument back. How do you get this kind of training? How can you learn how to do that just in everyday conversation?
Well, I have a lot of materials in the back that will help you on your way, especially our Israel 101 booklet. It was designed by our research team. We have Dr. Roberta Seid, who is, she is a PhD from Berkeley, which is also just such a supportive place of Israel. Not really at all. And she saw the need for just injecting fact back into the conversation with people. And because for me, I'm not really that interested in, the people who, like, for me, you're never going to change my mind. You're never going to change any of our minds on Israel. We're already set. We already know. And then there's another, percentage of people, it's like 10% of people in any crowd who are just so set against you that you're never going to change their minds. Only God can do that for them. They're so against Israel, they're never going to change their minds. But then there's this majority, it's about, like 80% of people who, I like to call them potential friends, who they don't really know either way. It's really this is, and that's why I really appreciate, like APAC's model too. They really get it. I spend the majority of my time on people whose hearts are fertile ground for seeds of the facts, of the truth. And, and just speaking to those people. But, so just be educated. I know that, like, when I was still starting out with the, having to face the, things that are taken out of context that Israel does, things that, are just misinformation or just downright hateful, I would be, like, now I do this for a living, so obviously I have to know Israel 101 by heart, and I do, if you're watching. But I know that I referred to that book a lot because it really has everything. We also have a book back there that's how to answer the 25 biggest objections against Israel. in just short, like one paragraph kind of thing, which even now is too much text for kids. But, the thing about Israel is that what people are doing who are critics of Israel, they oversimplify it. They oversimplify the issue. And they make you focus only on the political side when there's so much more to Israel than that. And so when someone is able to say, like, has anyone heard of Israel being accused of being an apartheid state? Okay, right? And most people, when I ask them, so then when my students face that, they get freaked out because they're like, I don't know how to answer that. I'm like, okay, so here, hold on a second. Ask them, okay, so how do you define apartheid? And I will tell you about 9 times out of 10, this is the answer that I get. Well, I know apartheid's really bad, and I know Israel's really bad, so Israel must be apartheid. I'm like, okay, with that logic, we're in trouble. And then I define it for them. I define what apartheid actually was, and then show them and use that to go into the facts and say, this is how Israel is not apartheid. And so those are the things that, most of the time, because we live in a postmodern world where nothing has definitions anymore, and people are able to put pressure on Israel because of human rights. Isn't that disgusting that people are able to say that Israel is violating there was just a UN human rights resolution that went through a month ago where Syria and Pakistan, really great beacons of human rights, were able to pass a UN human rights resolution against Israel, saying that Israel was violating the human rights of Syrians by closing the border. Wow, the fact that this can happen in our day and age, and I've been able to use that with people to say, like, this is what's happening right now. What is human rights? Why has it been turned on its head and able to be used against, someone who actually, they're so far ahead of us in so many ways in terms of morality and how they treat, their neighbors, that we can learn from them. But I don't know if did I answer your question? You did. Okay, and I can also come back. I do seminars on, I do Israel 101, how to, engage people. That's what my organization is for. So if I didn't totally bore you, I would be happy to come back and and help you guys with that.
What's the website? Because a lot of those booklets for people who are watching on the live stream or watch the video, they need to know how to get some of that material. And some of that you can just download. I've got Israel 101 on my iPad, and some of the other booklets are just a free download onto your electronic device or whatever.
It's standwithus.com, so standwithus.com. And all of our materials are in PDF form. And another thing that we're really good at is if you have an emergency situation. Like, for example, I just had a student in Birmingham who goes to just a high school in Birmingham, Alabama. I had no idea there was a Jewish community in Birmingham, Alabama. But he got in touch with me because he knew that I was a support for high school students. And there was a petition going around from his Amnesty International club that most of these students who were signing it weren't even reading it because people don't read things anymore, but they were just signing their names because the student who would ask them, say, hey, sign this petition if you're for education in the Middle East. And they're like, oh, yeah, I'm for education in the Middle East. And he gave me a copy of the actual petition, and it was talking about accusing Israel of cutting off Palestinian children from further education because of the blockade. And so I sent it to our research department. They took it apart, and we were able to create a fact sheet within 24 hours, gave it back to him. He was armed with the facts. He met with the Amnesty International Club president, walked her through all the facts. She apologized. She actually publicly apologized. They took down the petition. The faculty actually apologized to the Jewish community, and they had taken it down from, so this is what we do when we arm our students with the facts. I mean, I have students coming to me. I just had one of my students who was an intern of mine last year. She's going to American University in Washington, D.C. They just watched With God on Our Side, which is a very anti-Israel, evangelical, like anti-Zionism type of documentary. It's a really terrible film. And they watched it in her anthropology class. And so we're working on that now. And this is what our students are doing. They know that they have a resource and they're able to come to us. And it doesn't matter who you are. If you have, I have people coming to me about, like my aunt came to me the other day and asked me, like, someone posted this on my wall. I don't know how to answer it. How would you answer it? And I gave her, I told her what to say and walked her through it. I was able to educate her on that. And then another one of my friends, her great aunt, who I'm so shocked she can use a computer. She's 85, but she's really good. And she had the same thing. She had posted something about my friend's trip to Israel, and then there were all these hateful comments on her status. I'm like, that's shameful that someone did that to someone's grandmother. It's 85. But nothing is sacred anymore. And so I was able to help her grandmother at 85 answer these things and then educate her as well to say, you know what, I'm so glad that you know that this is wrong, but this is what you need to say, and then this is what you need to read now. And, and so the tide is turning. People know that this is wrong, and it really is these one-on-one interactions that are going to make a difference, just like the gospel, one-on-one interactions.
Great. Thank you, Vida. Melvin, did you have a question?
I wanted to mention two other sources of good information. There's an organization, the name of which, based on the acronym, is CAMERA, C-A-M-E-R-A. It stands for Committee for Accuracy for Middle East Reporting Association. But if you look at www.camera, and they focus on inaccurate statements made by whoever, New York Times, any other media source, say what was mistakenly stated, and then give the correct information. So that's worth looking at, and they've got there's enough inaccuracy so that they're kept pretty busy. They're putting out stuff every day. There is also a booklet called Myths and Facts that does a historical perspective of all kinds of inaccuracies over the years. And I think you could Google Myths and Facts. I've forgotten the name of the organization that publishes it, but they update it quite regularly, and it's a good source of misinformation and the corrections for the misinformation.
What? Honest reporting?
Yes.
Yeah. There's a number of good organizations. In fact, we probably need to make a list and put some of those links on the Dean Bible website. Anyway, Vida, thank you so much for coming. We just appreciate it so much, and for your stand with Israel. All right, I want to thank everybody for being here this evening. A number of my friends from APAC who are here, really appreciate your support. Don't forget to get some information on the back table. Back there, both the Stand With Us information as well as information related to Israel bonds. Before we go, let's just bow our heads together. I want to close in prayer. Our Father, we're just very thankful that we have an understanding of the truth in relation to Israel, and as Christians, our understanding comes from the Scripture. We go back to the promise that God made to Abraham, that this was an eternal, unconditional promise to Abraham to give the land that is the land of Israel in perpetuity, and that this land would be theirs forever and ever. And Father, we pray for us as Christians that we might always understand these facts on the basis of our understanding of your word first and foremost, but also understanding the significance of Israel just in terms of her relationship to the United States and the significance of that relationship, and how we as Christians need to understand that we're part of a battle that has many different fronts, one of which is in relation to Israel, and that we need to stand firm on the basis of the Scripture first and foremost, and for many other reasons as well, as we see the tremendous benefit and interaction that our country has with Israel. We're thankful for Vida and for her work and testimony, and we're thankful for the many other Christians who are involved alongside of Israel in support of that nation. And we just pray this all in the name of Jesus Christ. Amen.